C60 olive oil is a popular choice for people wanting to activate their full potential. Improved sleep, faster recovery and more energy are just a few of the amazing comments received from our customers who take a spoonful a day. Make C60 oil a part of your daily routine and see what it can do for you. Activate your potential today at thec60company.com.
Here we are at the start of 2020, the start of a decade that ends with 2030. And that is the year again and again and again that keeps coming up in statements and documents from this global cult behind world events as the time when they want so much of their control system in place, including, quoting Google executive and quote futurist Ray Kurzweil, a connection to the human brain by AI, or at least that whole process will be underway. So the next 10 years, the decade of the 2020s, is going to be a pivotal decade that's going to decide so much about where humanity goes. So I'm up and ready with me sleeves rolled up, and off we go. It's appropriate, I guess, that we're starting a new year, a new decade, with the continuation of what has gone before, because it is a plan. It is a blueprint, a biorhythm chart, whatever you want to call it, that we're looking at. A long-term, long-planned outcome for human society. And as anyone who's read my books or looked at my work over a long period will know, I've been saying that they are desperate for war with Iran, which they would like, I say they, I mean this cult, to break out into a global conflict involving the West against Iran, China, Russia, etc. And if you follow events as they unfold in the shadows, and often not even in the shadows, connecting the dots in the scene, you will have seen the sequence of events that's led us to where we are now, with this big kicking off of the conflict between America and Iran. After the Americans killed this Iranian military chief, Qasem Soleimani, when you see the sequence of events, where that sequence of events leads is no longer a surprise, because you've seen the steps towards it all along. And of course, you can't understand what's happening in terms of this Iran-America situation without bringing in Israel. Israel, or rather the Sabbatean Frankist cult that controls Israel, which is a major aspect of this global cult, you cannot appreciate what is happening now without appreciating Israel, and particularly the Sabbatean Frankist cult that control Israel. Israel has had, this cult has had, a list of countries that it wanted to regime change for a very long time. You can go back, as I've said many times, to the month of September 2000. Just have a sip of water here, where this Israel Sabbatean Frankist cult front or think tank called the Project for the American Century published a list of countries that it wanted to regime change, and how to do that it said it needed a new Pearl Harbor, a new major catastrophe for America, that would justify to the American people massive increases in military spending and a series of wars in the Middle East to pick off these very countries on the list. And of course, along came 9/11. In my last book, The Trigger, I show how 9/11 was centrally controlled and centrally orchestrated, not by Osama bin Laden, but by this Sabbatean Frankist cult operating out of Israel. So the dots all start to connect in that along came 9/11 in September 2001 at a time when those that wrote that Project for the New American Century document listing these regime change countries were actually in the Bush administration, able to make those moves that would lead to these countries being targeted. Along then came 9/11, which gave them the excuse, first of all, to target Afghanistan, claiming that Osama bin Laden was behind the 9/11 attacks and he was in Afghanistan, so they have to go for Afghanistan. Of course, they're still there. And then to start picking off these countries on this list from September 2000. Iraq, Libya, Syria. They also mentioned North Korea and Lebanon. And, of course, also in the list was the big one from their point of view, Iran. And so in this one-party state that is America and is virtually every other country, we had a Republican, Boy George Bush, and in Britain we had Labour Party Prime Minister Tony Blair, fronting up the invasion of Afghanistan and then the invasion of Iraq based on a lie about weapons of mass destruction. Of course, the lie was simply because they didn't have a reason to invade Iraq, so they had to make one up. It's on the list, so we've got to make one up to justify it. And of course, the catastrophe that's followed is there for all to see. Then Bush moves out, Republican, and in moves Barack Obama. Then Blair moves out, and eventually, after another Labour Party Prime Minister called Gordon Brown, in came the Conservative Party Prime Minister, David Cameron. And Cameron and Obama then oversaw the targeting of Libya, which has been catastrophic, and Syria, the start of the so-called civil war in Syria, which is actually orchestrated by American-funded and armed and Saudi Arabia-funded and armed terrorists. And then eventually Obama and Cameron move out, and in America in comes Donald Trump. Donald Trump, who was elected to a very large extent through his commitment to stopping these wars in other countries. And that commitment, without which he would not have been elected, has made it more difficult for the cabal around him, ultimately the same cabal, the same cult that was around Bush and was around Obama. It's made it more difficult because they wanted to have a war with Iran. But from an electoral point of view, Donald Trump knows that that would be disastrous. In fact, just a few weeks ago, maybe months ago now, there were planes in the air on their way to attack Iran, and Trump pulled them round, turned them round at the last minute. And it's very, very clear why. Someone had had a word in his ear, or he had been, it had been pointed out, the facts of life, that if you attack Iran, then your electoral chances of getting re-elected are dramatically less, because you're going against what your entire political base wants. But around Trump is this Israel-centric group that wants war with Iran, because Israel and the Sabbatean and Frankist cult wants war with Iran. So Trump is between a rock and a hard place from his point of view. The rock being electoral consequences, and the hard place being the networks that control him. And so they've gone along the road, because what they're looking for, what they've been looking for all along, is a reaction from Iran. You know, it's the same situation that we saw in the run-up to America's arrival in the Second World War. The president, Franklin Roosevelt, who was completely owned by this cabal, he got elected by telling the population that their sons and daughters were not going to fight in a war in Europe. But Franklin knows they are. So he gets elected by telling the people what they want to hear. But then he's got a problem, because they are going to fight in that war in Europe, because it's part of the plan of the cult. So they had their 9/11, which was Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And when you read absolutely detailed documentation of what actually happened, Japan was prodded and prodded and prodded through various means into that attack. And the American government and military knew it was coming and when it was coming. That's why a lot of major American naval ships weren't in Pearl Harbor at the time. And something like 3,000 people, as I recall, were killed, similar number to 9/11. And as a result of that, Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, of course, Franklin Roosevelt was in the clear, because he would then say, well, you know, I didn't want to go into this war in Europe, but we got no choice now, we've been attacked. Oh yeah, Franklin, yeah, we understand, we know you didn't want to do it, but what can you do? No, 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 no. This has happened. Classic problem reaction solution. With problem reaction solution, you can create a problem, or you can allow a problem to happen that you could have stopped. Or, of course, as with weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, you can just make a problem up that doesn't actually exist. Climate change caused by human activity, I rest my case. So, what we have been looking at through the Trump administration is an effort to so prod Iran that they would respond. And the response would then be justification for the war that they plan all along. And in the background publicly, but not in the background in the shadows, is Israel, constantly pushing for an attack on Iran. And we even have the confirmation in recordings of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, recordings he didn't know were being recorded, that he claimed that he was responsible for Trump ditching the nuclear agreement with Iran, which kicked all this off. It kicked off this sequence because there was an agreement with Iran over nuclear development that had calmed everything down. But of course, if you want a war with Iran, you don't want things calmed down. You want things to kick off. And so they got rid of the nuclear agreement, unsupported by European politicians. And the sequence began, which has led us to where we are now. So Trump's fear, another sip. So Trump's fear of electoral consequences for an outright attack on Iran from his own, if you like, decision making, I'm going to attack Iran, has meant that Trump has gone down the road, this prodding in the chest road, of extreme economic sanctions. Because the idea is that you cause so much economic deprivation among the people of Iran that one of two things happens. Either Iran militarily reacts, which is what you want, because then you've got your excuse for what you've planned all along, or, and we've seen an effort to do this, you create so much deprivation and unrest in the country through economic sanctions that through your agents provocateurs and the CIA and other military intelligence operations will have that sorted in Iran. You start protests, the classic People's Revolution protests, that overthrow the regime that you want to get rid of. And they tried that a few weeks ago, but the Iranian government stopped it. And I'm not an apologist for the Iranian government. I think that the Iranian system of religious control is appalling. But if we're going to be mature and look at something from a unbiased point of view so that our perceptions are not filtered through the bias, then you have to see that it's clear that Iran was not threatening the United States, but it's on the list of regime change countries, a major name on that list. And so the efforts have been going on and on and on to try to trigger this war. Excuse me. And so the sanctions didn't work. They didn't achieve their end, and so they've upped the ante because they just want a reaction from Iran so that they can justify this war. And so they've killed this military leader, Qasem Soleimani, and that has really triggered another level of this conflict. And we wait now to see what Iran's response will be, because what that is will decide where we go from here. If it's a military response, then the United States, urged on by Israel, that really controls the administration of the United States. Trump's owned by Israel, 100%, lock, stock, and the other thing. We will see a response from the United States, which will kick it off even more than up to now. And I'm looking at a headline this very morning. Donald Trump sees Iran's threat against 35 US targets and raises them by vowing to strike 52 Iranian sites. I mean, this is the politics of the playground. I mean, Donald Trump, who's never seen a gun fired in anger, is suddenly, we will do this, we will do that. Just like Tony Blair, we will do this, we will do that. George Bush, we will do this, we will do that. Obama, we will do this, we will do that. And the we is not the politician president or prime minister sipping tea in the bloody White House or Downing Street or coffee or whatever. It's the men and women of the American military. That's the we who will do this or do that. And at the other end of the we are civilians that are always in the crossfire of these playground bullies. And what is happening, and what's been happening since that Project the New American Century document listing these regime changes that it wanted and saying that America needs to fight multiple theater wars to bring them about, is we're seeing a country of 8 million people, Israel, using American men and women to fight its wars in the Middle East. Its wars of conquest, its wars of power. And so if Iran does respond here, and the signs as I speak are not good, in some kind of military way, then this really is going to kick off. And of course, it's not just about the United States and Israel and Iran. And by the way, you'll see that protests by Iranians over this killing have not just been against America, they've been against Israel, because anyone who follows this knows Israel's calling the shots here. And we now have an article here in the London Daily Mail, how Iran crisis could lead to World War III. Tehran could hit back with cyber attacks or terror attacks on US forces in Israel, provoking Donald Trump to retaliate in tit for tat. That could drag Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, and Turkey into it. Well, forget Saudi Arabia, you're talking Russia and China who would support the Iranians and have spoken against what has happened to this Iranian military leader in the last few days. And, you know, you can find interviews on the internet going back, way back, in which I was saying that the plan is to manipulate a war with Iran that would bring in Russia and China. The demonization of Russia year on year on year has been related to this. Now, whether they can pull it off is another thing. But we are now seeing the latest efforts to pull it off. And for all these people, I mean, when you've got John Bolton, the former national security advisor to Trump, who doesn't exist now, but it exists in another form, not the same name because it was exposed too much, who was a member of the Project for the New American Century in September 2000, pushing these regime change wars. Cough's got better, my mouth's gone now. These regime change wars. Then when he comes out and says what a wonderful thing it is that this Solomon has been killed, and he hopes that it leads to regime change in Iran now, then he's just confirming what we knew anyway, that this is a long-term plan that's going on now. And John Bolton was put into the Trump administration by a guy called Sheldon Adelson, who's a Las Vegas casino billionaire and ultra Zionist to his DNA, who is Trump's biggest funder and the biggest funder of the Republican Party. And what Israel wants is what Sheldon Adelson demands for his money. And he was the person responsible for getting Bolton into the Trump administration. And of course, Bolton then pressed for war with Iran. And he was behind this near catastrophic move when the planes were in the air before Trump turned them around. And in the aftermath of that, Trump got rid of Bolton because Bolton wanted to do something that Trump knew would be, for him, electorally disastrous. But here's Bolton now saying, yeah, this is what we want. Because you've got the plan, war with Iran, and you just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And when you get pushed back here, you push again and push again. And that's where we've got. And what a surprise that we have Benjamin Netanyahu coming out and saying that he praised Donald Trump for killing a top Iranian general and says US has a right to defend itself, which of course is what Israel says after it's had its latest attack on innocent civilians in Gaza. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has praised US President Donald Trump for acting swiftly, forcefully, and decisively to eliminate an Iranian general in a missile strike. And the reason he's praising it is because of where it could lead, which, as Netanyahu knows, has always been to war with Iran. The whole plan coming out of Israel and that which controls Israel. Now, this story kind of brings it all together. Israel knew, UK didn't. Benjamin Netanyahu was warned by the US of its plans to kill Qasem Soleimani ahead of the drone strike, while Britain was only informed of the attack once the mission was underway. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called Netanyahu to inform him. Well, officially, but Netanyahu, from conversations in the shadows, would have known anyway. Mike Pompeo is a Christian Zionist who answers to Israel. The deputy president, vice president, Mike Pence, is a Christian Zionist who answers to Israel. And so Trump's basically surrounded. And he answers to Israel as well. He just knows that if he does certain things, he ain't going to get re-elected. So anyway, this is the story. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was likely told of the drone strike on the general before the attack. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is understood to have briefed Israel ahead of the time about their plans. And Pompeo spoke to Netanyahu on Wednesday night. Pompeo spoke to Netanyahu on the phone Wednesday night. And while this was going on, the so-called allies in Europe, including the United Kingdom, were not told. Thursday morning, hours before the attack in Baghdad, Netanyahu warned of very, very dramatic things happening in the region. He tweeted, "I want to make one thing clear. We fully support all of the steps that the US has taken, as well as its full right to defend itself and its citizens." Moreover, we know that our region is stormy. Very, very dramatic things are happening in it. We are alert and are monitoring the situation. We are in continuous contact with our great friend in the US, including my conversation yesterday afternoon. So here we have ever more obviously the fact that what is happening with Iran is not just the United States. It's being driven out of Israel. And when you realize that the networks controlled out of Israel control the United States government and United States military and United States intelligence network, then it all starts to make sense when what is happening is to the benefit of Israel. And now we're having the UK warning British citizens to leave Iraq and leave Iran unless they absolutely have to be there. And we've got the Iranians warning of massive retaliation to come. And if that retaliation does come, then what I've been warning about for so long was the plan will start to move very, very quickly. And this is just more confirmation that we're not looking at random events that just happen. We're looking at a plan which has multiple elements. And one of them is war with Iran. And it's not easy to see how Iran, while from its point of view saving face, cannot in some way respond, or won't in some way respond. Watch this space, I guess, is the only way to describe it as we look at it today.